Let me tell you about a few things that are in Homestuck.
On YouTube, you'll find dozens of video essays and dissertations that analyze this odd little aspect of internet history and culture known as Homestuck, with the affectation of a disassociated or mid-professor giving an anthropology lesson about some strange other. Sometimes they'll claim to have been fans themselves, which is meant to give them credibility for their criticisms as a member of the in-group. Yet, if I try to defend against these criticisms as a self-admitted fan, I am accused of bias. However, the greatest example of this are with the cherubs, Calliope and Caliborn. The two are meant to represent the fandom directly in two parts, identifying the good and the bad. Calliope is meant to be the nice, studious fan who goes on a vicarious journey of martyrdom to join the characters that she loves so much. However, by this point in the comic, Homestuck had accrued a number of anti-fans that loved to hate Homestuck. And Caliborn is meant to represent them. Caliborn is not a mustache-twirling villain, but he's also not some Marvel villain who has a tragic backstory to justify doing the evil he does. No one made Caliborn do the things he does. There is a commonly levied critique, directed towards the epilogues and Homestuck Squared by former fans, that claims that the content after the conclusion of Homestuck gayed and transed up a bunch of the pre-existing characters. Yeah, it's basically the argument of, oh, I don't hate LGBT people, I just think you should make new characters. Something woke agenda. And this is nonsense. I can't believe that I've seen leftists and liberals make these arguments alongside the usual suspects on the political right. Dirk literally uses his influence as the self-proclaimed perpetuator of canon to clamp down on the transing of established characters. Jade. She was the subject of some controversy when it was revealed in Homestuck Squared that she has had a phallus ever since she merged with Beck. Some readers were grossed out at the idea that a cisgender woman would magically just have a phallus, and to make it worse, it's kind of a dog's phallus. And at first I got these criticisms, but the more I thought about it, the more I just thought, who cares? While bashing furries is an unfortunately common practice on the internet, I can't help but think that a lot of the criticism towards Jade's queerness is a result of latent heteronormativity, even among progressives.
Then there's Jack Noir, the only Carapacian with a proper name, where he seeks to rise above his people. As the Archagent, he's basically like the director of the CIA or a military general. He's opportunistic and selfish, but honestly, I had hoped we could see a humbled version of the character. I had thought that Spade Slick might have been that version, as the only Jack to ever be exiled and create things. But unfortunately, he got himself killed, and we never got to see Jack expand as a character.
Pair Rose with a man instead of a woman, I might criticize that pairing on the grounds that that pairing seems to erase her gayness. And if that person responded by saying my criticism was invalid because it was their headcanon or just a silly thing, that person would be asserting that what they choose to do with fiction is beyond reproach, and that is silly. But I'm sick of people in our community that refuse to make room to even discuss the racial politics within Homestuck. Politics. What are the socio-political implications of Homestuck as a series of art? A popular narrative around Homestuck has been established, one I hope to undermine. The idea is that Homestuck was a big, shameful thing of the internet's past, like contemporary comics like Control-Alt-Delete, something that we have to reluctantly acknowledge but shamefully hide in the back, and certainly never promote. Homestuck can only be analyzed clinically, post-mortem, like a patient we all once knew, etherized upon an autopsy table. We'll acknowledge that Homestuck was once huge, when it was kinda good in Act 5, but since then it has thankfully dropped off in popularity to go into the dustbin of online engagement. Only still loved in the modern day by weirdos, freaks, and degenerates. And not only have the creators of Homestuck, namely Hussie, committed the crime of continuing to make more Homestuck content, they've also stolen millions and ruined people's lives. This narrative is at worst inaccurate and at best reductive. And it is this narrative I want to squash if I'm able.
You're not that guy, pal. Trust me. You're not that guy.
Bring up Homestuck to a stranger online, the only responses of recognition you'll often receive will be of concern, if not outright hostility. Many Homestuck communities have had to become enclaves to find peace, meaning that the people around my age, especially in progressive spaces, are often former or closeted Homestuck fans that just don't talk about it openly. There's even a number of high-profile leftists that have definitely read Homestuck and have opinions on it, but you don't normally hear about it because it's a divisive thing to bring up. The only two leftist content creators I've known to bring up Homestuck outside of a Homestuck takedown video are, first, video essayist H. Bomber Guy, who says, Toby Fox himself has a history of making fun of dumb aspects of fandoms, even going so far as to compose the parody Homestuck rock opera The Baby Is You, about a character somehow giving birth to their best friend to satire the bizarre limits of weird Homestuck fanfiction. Here, H. Bomber Guy is one of the few to even link the extremely popular game of Undertale to one of its primary inspirations, Homestuck, and he does it in a way that is simultaneously charitable and condemning. The other is streamer Vosh, who says,
I've read Homestuck twice. That's enough for me.
Why is Homestuck so maligned? As with a lot of the internet, we have to go back to Gamergate. The general political bias of the English-speaking internet tends to wax and wane with a myriad of factors, and these can be categorized, though they tend to only be recognized by the majority in retrospect. These factors can be national elections, government regulations, general culture shifts, algorithmic alterations, societal education, technological advancement, and many other things. Gamergate was a shift around 2014, where ethics in games journalism was used as a veil to cover for harassment campaigns against women and basically anyone the right wing didn't like. And it would eventually lead into a post-Trump election era, but Gamergate didn't come out of nowhere. It was a culmination of shifts in policies before it, most notably YouTube having a positive feedback loop towards extremist right-wing content in its algorithm. I bring this up to say that while Homestuck began in 2009 with a bunch of kids and programmers, by 2012, Act 6 was rolling out at a time where people were increasingly being radicalized to the right and bolstering a new wave of neo-Nazis. Where was Homestuck during this? Well, it wasn't with what would become Gamergate. Homestuck had already made its place within Tumblr culture, which was effectively, diametrically opposed to YouTube at the time, as a relatively safe haven for queer people. The effects of Gamergate on Homestuck aren't invisible. They definitely rear their head with its ancestors, but for the most part, Homestuck didn't jump on the bigoted bandwagon, and I think this is notable. Homestuck was on a decline since its peak in Act 5, but I'd wager that many of the fans they bled first were the reactionary ones. It wasn't uncommon for right-wing Homestuck fans to say that you should stop reading after Act 5. Despite Act 6 constituting about a third of the comic. In 2012, a Kickstarter to create a Homestuck video game garnered over $2 million in crowdfunding, and the creative team behind Homestuck coalesced into Webcomic Studios, with Hussie at the lead. This game would eventually become Hiveswap, but developing news began to drag on and become quieter and quieter. I admit that to this day, I don't think Hiveswap will ever be finished. And many haters of Homestuck have gone through great efforts to document every bit of drama in the development process to ultimately make the claim that Webpumpkin maliciously wasted their donors' money. $2 million is simply not a lot of money to make a game. So let's now focus on the backlash, as reactionaries from both within and without the Homestuck fandom made hating it their passion. Much like the stereotypical gamer, the anti-fan wears their passion for a piece of media as a badge of honor, with the expressed goal to deny the criticism of others who do not wear this badge. This is why a lot of anti-fans will claim to have once been Homestuck fans. While they may well have been, their badge is unassailable, and retorting that you too have such a badge must be interrogated. Notice, by the way, how when the epilogues and later Homestuck Squared was released, these anti-fans, by and large, shifted from Homestuck was good before Act 6 to Homestuck was good before the epilogues. Like many reactionaries, they throw a fit every time history moves forward and simultaneously claim to have been on board until just recently. Obviously, I don't have any hard numbers on this. I'm just a person telling you my experiences and saying how I see things, and how I believe a lot of modern-day maligned Homestucks see things. Of course, though, I will explain this from a left-wing perspective, which will ensure everyone hates me, even the left. When I think of who Homestuck's fanbase has been over the past decade or so politically, I think it shakes out like this. At first, you could divide the fans into three categories. First, you had reactionaries, people who enjoyed Homestuck but would freak out if they heard any buzzwords they at the time called SJW, now called woke. This group was on board but would have to actively be pandered towards lest they jump ship, while projecting everyone else was pandering. There were also the liberals, people who had been born and raised in a relatively agreeable mindset when it came to social issues. These people would have always been on board with progressive themes, making the queering of Homestuck likely a happy surprise for them. The last group were, well, okay, they were just a bunch of dumb kids that didn't really have much of an ideology. Impressionable, they could have ended up as anything. And relevantly, they were consuming Homestuck. The queerification of Homestuck would thus tend to result in the queerification of these dummies.
No. Wait.
Well, by the time the epilogues came out, a two-front campaign of bigotry began to narrow in on Homestuck. But when Hussie ceased writing and let another team at Webpumpkin take the reins for Homestuck Squared, this two-faced campaign was cranked up significantly. Not only were right-wing anti-fans sending death threats and harassment to the writers of Homestuck Squared and their defenders for it being too progressive, but they also had to deal with woke skulls claiming to be the left, harassing them for making work that was actually really problematic, homophobic, and transphobic. Too woke, and not woke enough. They felt trapped, and the two-faced harassment campaign worked. Homestuck Squared was put on indefinite hiatus. It was over. It often goes unsaid that the team creating Homestuck Squared was mostly queer, and consisted of both gay and trans folks. So, anytime I see someone discussing the legacy of Homestuck, talking about the toxicity of the community, or making a takedown video of the comic and fandom, and they don't mention how it all came crashing down, how the artists and writers have been the targets of bigoted harassment, they're being duplicitous by omission. And that's complicity as far as I'm concerned. Hate Homestuck if you want, hate Webpumpkin, hate the toxic fans. But know who you side with if you downplay the transphobic bigotry that brought Homestuck Square to its end. Can't help but think of how Hussie had promised to grant a fan's wish, that John would eventually transition into June. And I think of how a lot of people really wanted to see that come true in at least one timeline. It seemed like we were leading up to that, perhaps with the Candy timeline. But we probably won't ever get to see that now. Not in any official capacity. And nowadays, most Homestucks are closeted. And that's because of bigots. Both on the right and the supposed left. That's why I use the term woke skull. Woke skulls are bigots that cozy up to the left, but they are not progressive. I don't care what freaking dictionary words they use as they tear down our queer comrades. What matters are not just the words you use, but your actions you do with those words. And these actions are a shame.